This is Street Knowledge with Chris Graham. This is Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the podcast. Chris Graham and Scott German. We're going to break down Virginia's 59-55 comeback win at Florida State. Virginia down 10 points at the half, as many as 11 in the first half, and turning it around with defense and some offense. Let's give the offense some credit, too. Virginia scoring 37 points in the second half against a Florida State team that had everything to gain with a win. And Virginia now, I got to say this out loud, get all of it out on the table. We'll break it all down as we talk. But Villanova, a few minutes after the conclusion of the game in Tallahassee, Villanova loses at home to St. John's. And so number one is on the line on Saturday, but that's a few days off. Scott, your thoughts about this Virginia win? Corey Alexander, let me throw it out this way. Corey Alexander said after the game that he thought this win might have been more impressive than the win at Duke, just because Virginia had to come back from a big deficit. I think I might agree. I want to see if you agree with that.
Yeah, I do now because knowing that Duke, it's not as a vaulted Duke team as we thought. They went up and lay an egg up in New York against St. John's on Saturday. So you're going down there, you're playing a good offensive team, a very athletic team on their home floor. And at some point in time, whether UVA, the players want to admit it, you've got to factor in there has to be some fatigue in there somewhere, or one of those intangible things that we talked about that just not there tonight is going to happen. And at halftime, it may have looked like that was going to be the game that got them. They weren't efficient offensively. Didn't look that good on the defensive end of the floor. Trailed by 10 points. That was an impressive win. I would say that I would agree with Corey that this may be UVA's most impressive victory of the season.
And I'll lay that out, too, with some specifics. We talked about Virginia was down as much as 11 in the first half. It was 10 at halftime. When you look at some of the other particulars as well, you had 2 fouls each for Isaiah Wilkins and DeAndre Hunter, who didn't score in the first half. Hunter's been a guy who's been a real key for us lately. In fact, only had 4 points on the night. But so those 2 guys are in foul trouble. Florida State's a big team, so that's a big thing. Virginia's shooting 9 of 26 from the floor, 2 of 7 from 3. And all that said, and Florida State, of course, comes out guns a-blazing. They hit 4 of their first 5 from 3. They were contested shots, too. It's not like they were wide-open shots. Phil Kofor hit a couple with a hand in his face, fading away from 23, 24 feet. And so Florida State seems like they're throwing everything towards the rim that's going in. Virginia can't get anything going offensively. You got 2 of your key defenders in foul trouble. And then Virginia gets the ship righted a bit. Last 5:54 of the first half, Florida State doesn't make a basket from the floor. And so you're still down 10, even with all that. So Virginia comes out in the second half. They cut the lead. There was an early 11-4 run to cut the lead down to 3. It was 36-33. Florida State gets an offensive rebound, sort of an over-the-back, over Ty Jerome that wasn't called, and then a three-pointer on a fast break. So you worked for 6-7 minutes to get it down to 3. All of a sudden, you're down 8 again. A lot of teams respond there, or don't respond there, I should say. Virginia responds once again, another run, this time an 11-2 run to take the lead back. Florida State gets a couple baskets, timeout Tony Bennett, then Virginia takes control from there down the stretch. But there were a couple of times, Scott, in the second half where I would say, I'll just say it this way, a lesser team would have made the comeback, would have put all that effort out there, done a lot of good things, and then when the other team responds with a couple of quick baskets, that lesser team would have just kind of folded the tent up. This Virginia team, that's where I think this is why this win stands out to me as so impressive, because Virginia took a couple of really good shots from Florida State in the second half, even as Virginia was coming back, and was still able to withstand that. And that will really stand out to me. I was telling my wife, Crystal, here, we're in the home office, of course, and Scott's in his home office as well. Her first words after the game were that Tony Bennett wouldn't be very happy with this win. And I actually feel differently. I think that Tony Bennett in the program, they know that in March there will be a couple of games at least like this. If you want to win 6 games and win a national championship, you've got to win one ugly game like this. And so now they've got that under their belts. I think this is the kind of game that can really do you a lot when you're playing in March, and that's sort of my take as to why this one's so impressive.
Oh, I do too, and I don't really think that I would use the word ugly. I mean, this is kind of this is almost a typical type of a UVA win. If you look at these final stats, again, they almost you just can't get an indication that Virginia would come up with. Don't shoot well from the field. Kyle Guy had a tremendously off night from the field. I think he finished 5 of 19. So, all the stats pointing to a loss. Yet, we again, you look at some of those key stats that just jumped out at you. That at first glance you may not pay much attention to them, but the one that jumps out to me most is we had 15 points off of turnovers versus 4 for Florida State. That's your ball game right there. Not just forcing turnovers, but converting them into baskets.
Yeah, and I would look at one number that maybe doesn't jump out at you at first because, you say Florida State out-rebounds Virginia 31-27, and that's an advantage for Florida State. But when you dive inside that just a little bit, Virginia 19 defensive rebounds, Florida State 7 offensive rebounds. And my quick math on that says that's about 27-28% offensive rebounding percentage. Florida State was third was in the top 10 in the country. I know second or third in the ACC at 35% offensive rebounding percentage. You look at second chance points. Virginia actually 7-6 advantage in second chance points against a team that thrives on second chance points, creating extra opportunities with offensive rebounds. A big team, 2 7-footers that play together an awful lot. And so, yeah, the points off turnovers, we've gotten used to that this year with this team. The Virginia teams of past years didn't create a lot of turnovers, didn't get points off turnovers as a result. So, Virginia forces 11 turnovers, commits just 6, only 1 in the second half. That's an important stat to point out. But, yeah, the rebounding. This was a team that we noted this, Scott. The win over Syracuse at home, the win over Carolina at home, and there was one other game in that, I think maybe the win over NC State at home back in the early part of January, where Virginia was getting out-rebounded by the other team, even on that team's offensive glass. They've really turned that around. And the last 2 games against 2 of the best offensive rebounding teams in the country, Syracuse and Florida State, and Virginia's controlled the boards. And so in a game like this, and that's where I'll deviate, Scott, a little bit from you. I think this was an ugly win for Virginia because when you shoot 40% from the floor, your best player offensively, Kyle Guy, is 5 of 19. Now he had back-to-back threes that were really key in one of those runs in the second half, but 5 of 19 from the floor. You had that whole first half was ugly. 22 points on 30 possessions against Florida State in the first half. But you rebound well. You continue to force the turnovers. You don't turn the ball over yourself. And you make shots when you need to. And so, yeah, you need wins like this. You're not going to go out and play a perfect game every time in the NCAA tournament. You're going to play a team that's going to get hot like Florida State did in the first half tonight. You're going to have foul trouble like Virginia did. Isaiah Wilkins fouls out. Hunter has 4 fouls and really is limited as a result of that. This was – I think that when I say this is an ugly win, Scott, I feel like it's an ugly win. It's so ugly that it was beautiful because this is the kind of game that most teams in the country lose, and don't just lose, they lose spectacularly on the home floor of a team like Florida State. I think that's why this ugly win is so pretty in my eyes.
Well, and it's nice for us to be disagreeing on how we would label a UVA win. And, I'll concede it. You want to call it an ugly win, I'll call it an ugly win. Just a few minutes ago, you made a comment that a lot of previously good teams, UVA teams, they would have lost this, and I agree. This is a game that even back a couple of years ago, when we had Malcolm Brogdon and Justin Anderson, I'm not so sure that team is able to come away from Tallahassee with a win. This team just seems to thrive in that for that moment. And here's a comment I did listen to some of the post game, or they had some quotes. comment from Jerome was that at the 5-minute mark there was a timeout, and they came back to the court. The place was going bonkers, and he walked up to Guy and said, "There isn't any place I'd rather be than right here."
Uh-huh.
I mean, these guys just, I mean, I think that kind of typifies the, you know, the mentality of the team. They just are cool under pressure, and they know their execution is so solid that things like that aren't bothering them. And you've got some real leaders, senior leaders on that team. We haven't even mentioned, we've been talking probably close to 10 minutes, and we have yet to mention the game that Devin Hall had tonight. Just a spectacular game. And that's what separates the UVAs from the Dukes. You've got an experienced guy. You got a coach on the floor. This year, Virginia might have 2 or 3 coaches out there on the floor. An extension of Tony Bennett. Hall had a spectacular game. I think he got 17 points, 3 or 4 from the three-point line, 4 or 4 from the free throw line, 3 rebounds, 3 assists. That's what you call a team, a true team leader.
And does so quietly again. I mean, he's not going to overwhelm you like a Trae Young scoring points in bunches. But you look up at the end of the night, he's got 17 points in a game where Florida State had one guy in double figures, MJ Walker with 10. You know that, and Corey Alexander, and we rarely have been agreeing with Corey, but one other thing he talked about was the great defense by Devin Hall, and you know it could be that Devin Hall is jumping up there in the Defensive Player of the Year race. You know, it's you look at what Virginia did to Florida State's perimeter guys, and it wasn't just Devin Hall. Kyle Guy and Ty Jerome also playing great D on the perimeter and playing a lot of minutes. Those 3 guys combined sat for 4 minutes. You know, your starting backcourt, because Virginia plays a 3-man backcourt, 39, 39, and 38 minutes played by those guys. But, you know, Florida State is a team that scores over 80 points a game. They had 55 in this game. They had one guy in double figures, a bench guy. Phil Kofer had 8 points about 5 minutes into the game. He finished with 9. Brian Angola made a 3-pointer on Florida State's first possession. That was the shot he made tonight. So that's what this Virginia team does. A Florida State team that had 93 points in that close loss to Duke. They had 81 points in a win over North Carolina. They regularly score in the 80s in ACC play. 55 points. They went 5:54 at the end of the first half without a made field goal. They went 9:01 at the end of the second half without a made field goal. And so, you know, Devin Hall is key to that effort and scoring. Even Kyle Guy, horrible night offensively, you know, for a guy who scored 13 points. He was 5 of 19 from the floor. But his defense, Ty Jerome's defense, you know, really key in this game. And let's give the guys in the paint some credit, too. We talked about how big this Florida State team is, you know, a front line of 6'8", 7 foot, and 7'4". Points in the paint, 20-20. So the Virginia bigs rebound well. They did more than what they needed to do in terms of scoring. So, yeah, you know, an all-around win on a night when you're not shooting the ball well, when the other team comes out on fire at home, needing a marquee win to really solidify an NCAA bid. This all stands out as, you know, it's a very satisfying win for UVA fans. I have, you know, that's the only thing I think you can really say, very satisfying for the UVA fan base.
Absolutely, workmanlike, whatever adjective you want. You know, I think yesterday on the podcast we talked about we had a series of teams coming up. Just about everyone we play now, with maybe the exception of Pitt, Notre Dame, beating Virginia might be the difference between making the ACC tournament or not, or making the NCAA tournament or not, or certainly improving your chances. This was the team tonight, Florida State. You know, they're on the bubble. I think they're on the bubble. Mm-hmm. They win tonight against Virginia, and they're probably squarely in the NCAA tournament. Now they're back certainly on the bubble again. So we're going to get teams that are out to, you know, make the tournament on the backs of beating us. And come Saturday night, we're going to have a Tech team coming to JPJ. Same thing. So we're getting the best shot. Not that we wouldn't get it anyway. We're number 2 team in the nation, soon to probably be number 1. We're getting those opponents' best shot. But now we're getting them for not just because we're a highly ranked team, but because those teams need a victory over UVA to put them on the right side of that bubble, or on the inside of that bubble. So, yeah, this was a very impressive win for Virginia. And I'm sure we haven't heard Coach Bennett's comments because he's probably been talking as we are. But I would doubt very seriously if he had any major disappointment in this effort tonight.
Yeah, I've been around enough. Not just as a reporter, but for a few years, I had the opportunity to work really closely with the post-grad basketball program at Fishburne Military School. And I bring that up for this reason, because in addition to writing about those games, I got to really dive into the mind of the coach, a guy named Ed Huckabee, who's coached at the college level. And his players, post-grad players, are all college players. So, seeing how he approached his team, sometimes a coach looks at a loss as an opportunity to teach, and especially when you're not in a tournament. When you're in a tournament, you lose, you're done. But when you're in a regular season game and you lose, you want to win every game. But sometimes you look at those things, a loss, and say, yeah, but we could improve. We could rebound better. We could play better defense. We can give 40 minutes of effort. You can come up with a number of things you can do better. And sometimes losing maybe gives you as a coach an opportunity to get the attention of your team and make them work harder at what they need to improve on. Because ultimately, the goal is to win the last game of the season, and the last game of the season is for a championship, whatever level you're playing at. And so I say that to say this. I don't know, and it might be an odd thing to say, I don't know that this Virginia team needs to learn from losses. I think some teams need to learn from a loss. You hear Coach K talk about when they lost to Virginia, they lost to St. John's, they need to learn from those losses. I don't think this Virginia team needs to learn from a loss. And I think that we've seen them. I mentioned for example, the improvement in defensive rebounding. They won games against Syracuse, NC State, and North Carolina when they weren't rebounding the ball well defensively. They've improved on that even while still winning. I'm sure after this game tonight, you'll see Coach Bennett and the program, his assistants and the players say, hey, we need to attack more from the get-go. In the second half, we really attacked the lane more. We got more layups, more drives to the basket that open up the threes better for us. We need to start that in the first half. We don't need to wait until we get into a bad situation. So, but most teams have to lose to learn lessons. And this Virginia team, Scott, they win in spite of having things not go 100%. And I don't know that I've ever seen a team as adept at that as this Virginia team.
Yeah, I guess I'm not saying that people that subscribe to that theory, but I've never been that one. Maybe it's because I was such a poor loser, but I don't think you learn anything from a loss, especially when you're a team. That to me is kind of like a moral victory after a loss, especially for a team that is as talented as UVA. Losing a game against a team that you're definitely better than, I don't see how you lose. You learn from that. Virginia just, it's a 40-minute game, and we know that there are going to be stretches where they don't look good offensively. They go into droughts. Just as, they go 3 minutes, 4 minutes, sometimes without scoring a basket. But that's just the way, I guess maybe that's a toll that playing so intense on defense might take that may have a toll on the other end of the floor. But, bottom line is, tonight, Florida State has a 10-point lead at halftime against the number 2 team in the country. And then the number 2 team in the country showed why it was 22-1 coming into the game. They just lit it up behind the three-point line in the second half, continued to play suffocating defense, and, did what Virginia did. I was looking at some other stats. Seminoles' leading scorer, Terrence Mann, he had one basket on the night and finished with 3 points. Angola, who hit that first shot of the night for FSU, he missed his final 10 of the game, finished 1-11 from the floor. I mean, it's amazing that the game was this close. When two of your top offensive players are a combined, 2 for 22, 2 for 23.
No, 2 of 15. Now, that's the thing that stands out about Mann to me.
2 of 15.
Yeah, when you look at Mann, here's a guy who's your leading scorer, as Scott pointed out. He shot the ball 4 times. He made one, but he only shot it 4 times. So it's kind of hard to score when you don't even shoot the ball, and that's not because he's choosing not to shoot the ball. That's pressure. And that's, Angola going 1 for 11. He's just jacking the ball. Hey, sometimes you just shoot it. 1 for 4 from your leading scorer. I mean, and we've seen this before, Scott. Luke May, had a night like that in his game against Virginia, Carolina's game against Virginia back in early January. I mean, that's what Virginia can do to you defensively. They don't just make you miss shots. They take the ball out of your hands to begin with, and that's really impressive. Did I lose Scott? Did I lose you?
No, I'm here, Chris. Yeah, I agree. How does your leading scorer only find a way to take 4 shots?
That's that's the magic of the defense and the approach from Virginia. So now let's switch gears a bit. So we've talked about Virginia, Florida State. I mentioned that Villanova then loses a few minutes after our game. Villanova loses at home. Technically at home. They're not on campus this season because of reconstruction at their home arena. But they lose in Philadelphia to St. John's. St. John's had lost 11 straight going into last weekend. They've now beaten Duke and Villanova back to back, which is very odd to say the least. But what that means for Virginia fans is number 1's down, and Saturday Virginia Tech in town. Virginia wins that game. Virginia's number 1 in the country. And, I know, there'll be people out there, and Scott, you may even hold this view that number 1 during the regular season doesn't mean anything. And I would argue that it does, only in the sense that for the fan base, not for the team out there, they're hoping to be number 1 in April, and it's only February. But for a fan base that has been, a lot of folks, well, there are a number of folks who remember the Ralph Sampson era. There are a number of folks who've only heard about it. But Virginia has not been number 1 in the country since December 21st, 1982. And I think, that's 35-plus years. I think it would be significant just as a tip of the cap to Tony Bennett. He took over a program that Scott and I talk about a lot. We watched some really bad basketball in the Dave Lato era. We watched CBI basketball on weekday afternoons. We watched Liberty come in and torch Virginia in the last year of Dave Lato. Tony got the ship righted, and if in year 9 he has this program, even for just 1 week, ranked number 1 in the country, I do think that would be significant. So that's on the line Saturday, and boy, you can't. If you could only figure out a way to add more drama. We have game day in town. We've got Virginia Tech in town, the in-state rival, and now the number 1 ranking on the line. That's going to be a heck of a day for Virginia basketball fans, Scott. We have to rest up because that's going to be a very emotional day as well.
And I think there's, I think there's a lot of prestige to say that you've reached that pinnacle, being number 1 ranked team in the nation. Now, the most important thing is to be the number 1 ranked team in the nation come that Monday night in April. Certainly. That's a no-brainer. But still, it's a lot of prestige. It's pride going into that to say you climbed that ladder, so to speak. Here's some history. The last time, and unfortunately, I can remember this, and so I'm dating myself. In '82, we were number 1 team in the nation. We played Houston, came away with a really solid win over a good Houston team, and was number number one in the nation. I think we beat Houston on a Thursday night or maybe a Wednesday night, and left. I think it was in Houston, and then left and flew to Hawaii. And as the number one ranked team in the nation, played a team called Chaminade in the wee hours of the morning, East Coast time, and lost that game. So let's hope that Virginia Tech is not our Chaminade come Saturday night in JPJ.
Well, yeah, I've some of what I remember about that other game too. One, a good friend of ours who's since passed, Warren Evans, both of ours, was among the people there for that game, the Chaminade game. Virginia was flying back from they played Houston, but I think that game was in Japan, and they kind of used.
The Houston game was in Japan.
Yeah, and they flew back. They played Chaminade, an NAIA school at the time, just to have an excuse to stop in Hawaii on the way back.
Right.
And
you're correct. The Houston game was in Japan,
and they beat. It was a good Houston team. That was the Phi Slamma Jamma Houston. That was Akeem Olajuwon, Clyde Drexler, etc. That was a really good Houston team. So you beat that team. You land in Hawaii. You have a day or two on the beach, and then you play a basketball game against this NAIA team. And the upset of the century. That's the whole reason Chaminade has that Maui Classic is because they beat Virginia in that game. But yeah, talking about Virginia Tech and Chaminade, and I guess that's one thing that we've got is that our teams. I mean, and I'm now speaking as a fan, not as an analyst or anything else. Our teams in Virginia sports. It's been a while, but we remember what it feels like to be number one in basketball. Our Hokie friends don't know what that feels like. We also, we've been number one in football. Tech fans don't know what that feels like either. But I was actually in the stadium. I'm sure you were too, Scott, when Virginia played football as number one and lost to Georgia Tech in 1990. So we're not number one yet, but for Virginia fans out there, especially for us old-timers and a lot of old-timers like us, and for you new fans who get to have this fun experience for the first time, there's going to be a lot of, I'll say emotion, tension, etc., because I don't care what you say, those guys on the court, I say this generally, who on the court on Saturday, they want to be number one, even though it's more important to be number one in April. They want to be number one now too, and so and the fans want to be number one, and of course the Hokies. The Hokies are playing for lots of reasons. They don't care. The fan base would love to see their team keep us from being number one, but the team, Scott, you mentioned this earlier, the Virginia Tech team needs a win, in the worst way. They're on the wrong side of the bubble, and I think they're way on the wrong side of the bubble right now. And so a win over Virginia would certainly, I don't know that it gets them in the tournament. It gets them back towards the right side of the bubble. But so, there's a lot. Saturday's going to be a really interesting day, and we get to live a lot of that, starting with game day that morning and then the game that night. That's going to be a long, fun day for Virginia basketball.
Yeah, and Tech's winning at half 45-32, or near the end of the first half, 45-32 over North Carolina State. That game's being played in Blacksburg. So, Tech needs a win. Tech needs a marquee win because Carolina continuing to lose, we talked about this yesterday, that win against Carolina is meaning less and less. And you start running out of games. That's what I looked at. Tonight, Florida State, you start running out of resume building opportunities. Tonight, Florida State had that against Virginia. I glanced at their remaining schedule, and there's some winnable games in there, but unfortunately, it's games against teams that aren't going to improve. They play Pittsburgh, Notre Dame, and they have Boston College among their final games. They do have a home game, I think, against Duke and one against Louisville, but the real opportunities for Florida State to get a resume-building win is slipping away. Tonight was one right there. They had it. They're up by 10 at half, and Virginia just defied them and was able to come back and win the game.
Yeah, I just
Texas, the same situation. I think they have Duke twice, so those are certainly resume-building teams, but they're also games that they'll probably lose twice, too. So that's kind of a double-edged sword. It's going to be an interesting final couple of weeks in the league.
Yeah, I've just pulled up Florida State's schedule. 6 games left in the ACC, of course, then everybody goes to Brooklyn. 3 of those games are against Notre Dame, Pitt, and Boston College. Those, as Scott pointed out, are not resume-building wins. You got to win those games. You can't afford a hiccup in any of those games. That's 3 of your games. You got 2 with Clemson, home and home with Clemson, and then you got NC State on the road. So, yeah, I mean, Florida State losing tonight, 6-6 in the ACC. I mean, if they go 4-2 down the stretch, they're playing good basketball. That's 10-8. I don't know if I feel great about that if I'm Florida State at this stage. And then looking at Virginia Tech, you mentioned, they've got. I mean, they're playing NC State right now. They're winning at halftime as we're recording this. Then Virginia at Duke, their next 2 games, and we've talked about this the last week or so, Scott. This is a stretch where, if Tech wins one of those 2, good job. You've moved closer to the bubble. You could also get the doors blown off in both those games, and you're getting ready for the NIT because after that they've got they're at Georgia Tech, they got Clemson at home, Louisville at home, Duke at home again. So you mentioned the home and home with Duke, and then Miami on the road. So. Tech's 5-5 right now. They better win tonight, and they still got work to do. So it's fun. And I'll say this for Augusta Free Press, for those still listening here, 30 minutes into the podcast. Augusta Free Press, we got our credentials today for the ACC tournament. So we've already reserved the hotel room. Looking at the train schedule, etc. So AFP will be back for what would this be? The 6th straight year at the ACC tournament, 2nd year in Brooklyn. And we're about a month away from the tip-off of the tournament. A lot of basketball still to be played, but AFP will be bringing you that action, and then NCAA tournament action. Boy, I can't believe we're this close. This basketball season starts in November. It's a long trek all the way through March and into April. And Scott, I don't know. Final thoughts wrapping up this comeback win for Virginia tonight.
Virginia did what Virginia does. Just a gritty effort, typical of a Tony Bennett coach team, and this team is poised, I think, to really make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. It's been an incredible year for us, and it's not over. One thing too we might want to add, Chris, is that for those that are listening, or certainly listening this long, have to be diehard UVA fans. If you haven't seen the team play, and you probably tickets are pretty scarce for the rest of the season, pretty pricey too on the secondary market. If you want a great opportunity to kind of experience JPJ, then game day Saturday is your chance. It's free parking. I'd say come over, bring your kids. No, it's not a game, but it's as much as you're going to get, unless you want to shell out a bunch of money for these final 3 home games in the conference. So I'd say that now's your chance to really kind of experience what JPJ is all about for UVA basketball.
Yeah, I would second that. Scott and I will be there. We've been there the last 2 times UVA hosted game day. And, it's free. It starts on TV at 11, but, we get there 9 or 9:30 and just hang out. It's the ultimate. There's no pressure. There's no game to be played. It's just having fun with other UVA fans. You scream your head off for 3 hours. At the end of the day, a kid makes a half-court shot to get his tuition, because that always happens at Virginia, it seems. And, it's a fun time, and then it gets you ready for the game that night. I agree, Scott. If you haven't been to a game this year, can't afford a ticket because they're scarce with the number 2 team now as our team. Yeah, it's a great opportunity. Get there between 9 and 11. Plenty of parking. It's a fun time. Definitely a fun time. So I think that'll wrap us up for the night. We have a couple days in between now and Saturday. Scott and I, of course, will bring you everything on Saturday, but we'll get back together. I think on Friday if I can track Scott down, which I usually can, and he and I will break the Virginia Tech game down tomorrow. Jeff Fife will join me, and we'll probably talk more UVA, Florida State, and whatever else Jeff has in mind. I'll let Jeff kind of program that show. He asks me questions, I give him answers. So, so Jeff tomorrow, Scott Friday, and then Scott and I have a fun time coming up on Saturday. We'll help you enjoy it through our eyes as well. So, want to thank.
Chris,
Oh, sure.
Thing, Chris.
Huh?
One quick thing. One suggestion on Jeff on your podcast tomorrow with Jeff.
Uh-huh.
You guys have got to talk about. You really need to talk about and spend some time talking about that epic battle between Duke and number 20 whatever North Carolina tomorrow night, because I'm getting sick of hearing about it on ESPN.
yeah. The battle for fourth place. I've been calling it all week on the as I see those mammoth commercials. Yeah, the battle for fourth place in the ACC.
Hey, Chris, I was looking at the ACC standings. Here's a nut spot. We have 12 ACC wins right now. Combined, North Carolina and Duke have 13.
I had not done that math. That's that's interesting. That's perspective.
You can really get creative with numbers when you're just looking at every number you look at, it's a positive number.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now too, Scott, since you said that. And I don't think I've ever played like a basketball like video game when you can really manipulate things and have it manipulated to look this way. Virginia's 12-0, Clemson's 8-3, Duke's in third at 7-3, Carolina's all the way down in like sixth at 6-5. Yeah, this is like you'll hear about computer simulations being done a million times to simulate a season or whatever else. This is some random simulation that just happens to be the real life scenario. So we keep taking the snapshots of the standings because 12-0 looks really nice right now, but let's see it grow some more. So yeah, let's sign off for the night, and Scott and I will get back together here soon. But for the night, Virginia wins 59-55 at Florida State. Wahoo wah!